everyone, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sonia's News. Before I get started, I want to thank all you lovely people who subscribed to my channel, all the new people who came over from Why the Big Secret with Roderick Martin. I really appreciate you tuning in to subscribe into my channel and listen to me talk. But for those of you who have not watched his channel, Why the Big Secret with Roderick Martin, I suggest you guys check him out. It's a really good show. He has really great content. He comes on 5 days out of the week except for the weekend, so I highly suggest him. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is whistleblowers. I mean, I guess you would consider some of these people maybe whistleblowers, but not quite. Now, the reason I want to talk about that is with this new amendment that's coming out that's supposed to protect whistleblowers and people who work military, people who work in the military and people who work for private contractors like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, maybe Raytheon or whatever, and so on. So yeah, so let's get started. I have a list of people. I'm not going to go through the whole list because it's quite long, but I'm just going to name a few people who you consider possibly whistleblowers and maybe they were knocked off or murdered. So we'll get into it. So the first person I want to talk about is the late Phil Snyder. I'm pretty sure some of you know who he is and has followed his work. There was a couple, you just be able to find a lot of videos about him on YouTube. For some reason, YouTube has kind of scrubbed a lot of his videos that were on there. I tried to find some of them and I had a hard time finding a lot of his videos. For some reason, they've been taken down. But Phil Snyder was a geologist and an engineer that worked for the government. He helped build or worked on DUMBs, which were deep underground military bases. He drilled military bases underground or within mountains or whatever. Kind of like the base that is at S4 Cheyenne Mountain or whatever. I'm not sure if he worked on those, but you know what I'm talking about. You get the picture. So supposedly, when he was working on the Dulce, New Mexico base. And for those of you who don't know about the Dulce, New Mexico story, there's supposed to be some type of underground military base there where ETs and government or military officials or scientists work with aliens or whatever and they experiment on people. There has been a couple of Native Americans who said well, I know one Native American in particular who said that when he was younger, there was a vent that was in the side of the mountain. He crawled into it and he could hear like screams coming from this thing. It was just weirdness or whatever. And I used to see like black helicopters flying over this mesa or whatever, mesa in Mexico. But anyway, so Phil Snyder said that he helped drill a dam into the ground in New Mexico as part of the Dulce, New Mexico base. And he said they do. I guess the way it works, they dig these 4 large holes or whatever, and for some reason the drill head kept coming up damaged. So him and another person was lowered down into this basket to find out why the drill head kept coming as damaged. But the weird thing is, he said when his team got there, he saw the Green Berets and some other military encamped in the site where they was working. He thought that was strange. It didn't make any sense. But anyway, he was lowered down into this hole, and when in this hole opened up, it's like some type of cavern, and he said there was such an awful, bad, horrific smell down there. It smelled like a garbage heap. He said it smelled worse than a garbage heap. And was within this hole, he said there was a tall, large-nosed Greys living down here in this cavern, and he was terrified. And I guess at the time he was carrying his gun with him, which was a PBK pistol. So in fear for his life, he put out his gun. He shot at this Grey. He claimed that he killed 2 of them. And then another Grey waved its hand over his chest, and some type of laser type thing came out and hit Phil Snyder. He ended up losing his hands. He said the laser opened him up like a fish. One of the Green Berets came down or whatever and jumped in front of him and had him lowered back up to the surface, and the Green Beret lost his life or whatever. And so the point I'm getting is, Anyway, he claimed that the government, the military, knew that these graves were living down there, and they let them drill down there on top of their cavern anyway without telling him none of these beings were down there. He said it was just all a cover up. He stated there was a war going on or whatever. So anyway, fast forward 1995, he starts doing these lectures and conferences and stuff, and start talking about what he had encountered, what happened, and what the government knows, and the cover up and everything. And then in 1996, he was found supposedly committed suicide. He was found in his apartment wherever he was living, strangled with a catheter tied around his neck. What I find weird is, why would he use a catheter? There is so much more easier ways to commit suicide. He could have taken pills, because I know he was sick. I believe he had cancer, maybe terminal cancer. So he had a lot of medication. Wouldn't you just take medication to just OD and just go to sleep peaceful instead of taking a catheter, tying it around your neck? And I believe they said it was tied onto a wheelchair or a bed or something. Something that just didn't make any sense. But you guys can do the research it and look it up yourself. But I'm not sure if I'm not getting the whole story correct. But I know that he started doing lectures in 1995. And in 1996, he was found dead. And he stated that if you ever find me and it said I committed suicide, there was a letter, he said he did not commit suicide, he was murdered, whatever. And what is weird is his wife had even, ex-wife at the time, has stated that he would never have killed himself. And she also stated that after his death, the CIA and the FBI came to his house to take personal photographs and stuff from their house, which was the strangest thing. So yeah, so that's what I was getting at. So was it suicide or was it murder? It's just strange that he started talking about these lectures in 1995, and then within 1996 he was found dead. So moving on to the next person I wanted to talk about. I think I have 4 people altogether. The next person is Miriam Bush. So she was an executive secretary under Chief Medical Officer Lieutenant Colonel Harold Warren. So she was supposed to be a witness to the Roswell alien beings back in 1947. So according to my research and what I've heard, was that her boss, the lieutenant colonel, had told her to come with him. He wanted to show her something. So they went to this room, and in this room was the typical grave with the big head, the skinny, thin body, the long dangling arms, the fingers, and it was laying out on this table. I believe it was dead. I can't remember how many, if they said how many it was, she was witness to one. Either way, she was witness to it. So she went back home and told her family about it, whatever. And when she went back to work the next day, something must happen, or she must have gotten threatened or reprimanded or whatever, because when she came back home the next day, the following day, her family said that she was just in a somber mood, that she was sad, and she told them that they could never talk about what she shared with them, not to anybody, ever, ever, ever. So fast forward to like 1980s. I guess she ended up changing, I don't know if she ended up changing her name or she tried to go in hiding or something like that. I don't know the whole story. I don't know bits and pieces. Some UFO researchers got wind of that she was a witness to the 1947 crash. They ended up finding out that she was living in California for some reason. I don't know how they found it, but they found out she was living in California. And before they can go interview her, she ended up committing suicide. Another person worked for the government, witnessed to aliens, supposedly committed suicide right before they could interview her. And her family said there was no way she would have committed suicide. They just said she wouldn't have committed suicide. So yeah, that's another one. What's the next person? Next person is Ron Rummel. He was a UFO researcher, and he was also an ex-Air Force intelligence agent. Born in 1958. He died in 1993. I think I got that right. Yeah. I'm not sure about the date part he was born, but I do know he died in 1993 at the age of 35. So scratch the part about him being born. So he, like I said, he was an ex Air Force intelligence officer. And what is weird, there's not a lot of information about, because I didn't know about him until recently. Actually, just 2 days ago, who this guy was. And he wrote these books called the Alien Digest, and it talks about the government cover up and um, the government and the military working with these beings and humans being kidnapped and taken to other planets to be formed and all this type of stuff. And he goes on to talk about um, the abduction phenomenon, how babies and young children were being abducted, and the ETs or Greys kept them as full time abductees. So what he states is that the Greys were here abducting people because they needed our DNA. I guess they couldn't reproduce anymore, so they started cloning, and the cloning process started breaking down. So they needed our DNA to help with the cloning process, which essentially created a new species. That's why they're here abducting people. And then he wrote that the government knows about it, and they signed these treaties to allow them to take. They almost sound like the Creator Treaty that supposedly Eisenhower had made with the Greys for to allow them to abduct people. And then they got out of control and they started taking more people than they were supposed to, and it was in exchange for technology. But that's what he talks about in some of his books. He also talks about the Star Wars program and implants and reptilians and grays and what else. And right before he died, he was supposed to release another book about the Star Wars project before supposedly he committed suicide. He was found dead in a park in Portland, Oregon on August the 6th, 1993. Supposedly he shot himself in the mouth. But what is weird, there was no blood on the barrel, no fingerprints on the gun, and they said the body smelled like sodium pentothal. You know that drug that when people that makes you tell the truth like a truth serum. That's what his body smelled like when they found him, and they just ruled it as a suicide, even though there was no gun on the blood on the barrel, no fingerprints on the gun. And he also was a friend of Phil Snyder's, also. And that's in part why I think Phil Snyder might have came out also and started doing his lectures, because his friend got killed in 1993, well, suicided. But I don't know. You tell me what you think. But yeah, they were really 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 good friends. So yeah. Um, the last person I want to talk about is James Forrestal. He was the first U.S. Secretary of Defense. Also, he was supposedly one of the members of Majestic 12, MJ12. If you look at the Majestic 12 documents, I think his name is on the list. I believe it's the second or third one down. So supposedly he was part of MJ12. So Forrestal was committed to the Bethesda Nasal Hospital for, I guess, having a breakdown or whatever. And at 1:50 a.m. on May the 22nd, 1949, he was found dead on the third floor canopy of the Bethesda Nasal Hospital, falling from the 13th floor. So the thing is, okay, so he had someone in the room watching him. It was, I guess it was a friend of his or somebody who became a friend of his, another Navy officer. And for some reason, the Navy officer who had been with him for like weeks or however long he was committed, because I think he was put in the hospital he was committed in the hospital in April. Then he was found dead in May. And this guy had been with him the entire time. For some reason, on the day he died, another guy showed up to sit with him while the other guy left. And then the other guy ended up leaving the hospital room to go do something. And when he came back, he found the window open, and James Forrestal was not in the room, and there was this sheet tied to the radiator. And they tried to say, oh, he tried to kill himself or whatever, but the sheet broke and he fell, and it's just very suspicious because with him being, what was it? With him being the first U.S. Secretary of Defense, he had some major top secret information in his brain, and no doubt that he probably would have known about the UFO phenomenon or the Roswell incidents or the Aztec crash or the alien body. So he would have some significant information in his brain. So if he was having a breakdown and they was worried about that knowledge getting out, it's conceivable